All right. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the disability community.
My name is Celia. I am from the UK. I am a disabled woman myself. So I was born with a genetic abnormality called Loeys-Dietz syndrome. It's very weird and wonderful, and not many people have heard of it or know anything about it. A very brief synopsis, because it's quite complicated, is I was born with a lack of collagen in my body. It's very similar to Ehlers-Danlos, which I know lots of people know about. It's very similar to Marfan syndrome, and it's meant that my organs haven't grown properly, and just in general, my body's not doing great. It's manifested itself in a number of ways. I no longer eat or drink anything, completely tube fed, use mobility aids, lots of pain, etc., etc. So I've always had a really keen interest in the disability space and have grown up kind of firsthand witnessing and experiencing how systems are going wrong and where there are failures and where there are barriers where there don't need to be disability barriers for people. I actually did my degree in law, started working in law, and then my body gave up on me and said, this is not the career for us. We can't do this. It's not gonna work. It was very, very intense, and my body was not having any of it. And I've always been very politically active in keeping up to date with legislation and policy and what's kind of happening from a strategy point of view. And I started working on a campaign which I founded with a colleague of mine, to increase disabled representation in politics. And we were doing that for a number of years, and it was incredible to see the difference that driving up representation in politics and policy was having. And then we sort of sat back one day and said, this is so much bigger than this. This is so much bigger than just representation in politics. And, I'd known that working on parliamentary select committees and various things like that. So we thought the policy space itself, there was nobody out there specifically talking about disability policy, and that's what they were focusing on. So we founded the Disability Policy Centre, which is the first think tank which is led by disabled people and people with lived experiences, which focuses solely on putting accessibility at the heart of legislation. So that's kind of how I've ended up doing what I'm doing. And then I suppose as a result of that, alongside it comes the advocacy and being a speaker and representing people that go so underrepresented in society.
Yeah, that's because that's my next question. I understand that you're heavily involved in disability policy. So could you tell me a little bit about some of the work you do on that front?
So I mean, we cover everything. So there's this big misconception, and it's not just here in the UK, it's global, that disabled people get spoken about when we're talking about health and social care. And that's where the conversation ends. And that's when the consultation happens. That's when we reach out to disabled people and ask their opinions. And what we're saying is actually that is so outdated and so incorrect, is that disabled people apply to everything. We apply to every aspect of society, whether that's transport or tourism or employment or education. So a couple of things that we're working on at the moment, which are really exciting, is access to funding, which is a large campaign which is bringing together the global investment community and disabled entrepreneurs to improve opportunities and outcomes. One of the statistics that we found is that only 16.7% of disabled business founders think they are treated equally to non-disabled founders. And that's shocking. There's such a disparity in opportunity, and it's majority of the time because of unconscious bias. And that's what we're trying to do in all aspects of our policy work, is make sure that those barriers are broken down. So we work across disabled representation. We've done a lot of work around SEND education provisions here in the UK, and how our education system can be much better equipped to help children give the best start in life, no matter what their circumstances are. We're also doing a project at the moment about sport, and how the accessibility of sporting opportunities can be improved. It's not just about productivity, it's also about, we've reached a point of survival. Now, how do we make people thrive in society, and how do we make sure that disabled people have equal access to enjoyment and equal access to being able to be productive in society? So it's, I suppose, long answer shortened, we cover every aspect of policy and make sure that disabled people are involved in every aspect of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. So like what kinds of stakeholders do you partner with in disability policy and like out do you guys like partner with organizations outside of disability policy?
Absolutely. So quite often within disability community and the advocacy space, what ends up happening is we end up talking to each other and we all agree. So quite a lot of the advocacy work that happens, the audience are people that already agree with you. They're disabled people themselves. And one of the things that we're trying to do is break down that arena barrier and say, actually, we need to be talking to people that don't get it yet, that don't understand it yet, that don't have that natural understanding of what it's like to be a disabled person. So we work very, very closely with the government, with Westminster, the Cabinet, and Downing Street to implement the recommendations that we're making from our policy research. We also partner with various organisations. So we're partnered with an amazing two organisations here in the UK called the Centenary Action Group and Electa, and we run the Disabled Women in Politics Network. So they are not disability specific organisations, but names on the tin of what it is that we're doing is we're providing a community space for women who are disabled that want to get into that political representation field. We partner with charities. We were part of the Disability Power 100 this year, hosting the main stage event. And we also partner up with individuals. So we run a number of events, whether those individuals are disabled themselves or not. And we look a lot at intersectionality as well, which is a big topic of conversation that, in my opinion, goes very under discussed about the fact that, I'm disabled and I'm a woman. There's other aspects about me. So that's something that we also do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I could just like ask what's like the impact that disability policy has on people with disabilities and the community as a whole. In other words, like what difference does that make in people's lives? Uh,
I think that's a really, really good question, because quite often when you say policy doesn't really have a definition. It can mean so many different things. And we often get asked, well, why don't you just campaign for it? And the difference between campaigning and policy is campaigns raise awareness, but policy implements binding changes that means your rights as an individual are protected. It's legislation, it's measures and strategies which cannot be undermined. So if you are campaigning, for example, Changing Places is an amazing campaign that happens here in the UK, which is about improving access to accessible bathroom facilities and making sure that the facilities that we do have here in the country are adequate and that they're labelled and people know where they are and know where they're going. That has now been implemented as a policy, meaning that that's something that's going to continue once the campaign has ended. It's a protection now for disabled people, and that's what policy is. That's the impact. Is we're not just campaigning for it here in the now, we're setting up something forever that will make sure that the rights of people, whether they are disabled now or possibly future point in their lives, are protected and cared for by society, and that can't be undermined at any point.
mm-hmm. Finally, how can disability policy, be a catalyst for change and really remove the barriers that people with disabilities often face?
I think it's a massive catalyst for change. I mean, here in the UK, and I know other parts of the world, we have very tumultuous politics. People come and people go, and they come and go quite quickly at the moment, it seems. But policy sticks, policy stays. It doesn't matter who's in power, it doesn't matter who's in charge. It's there to protect people, and you have that consistency. It's, for example, if a government announces a set of funding or a new campaign that they want to run in schools or across the employment sector, whatever it may be, if there's a government change, that campaign and that funding has been lost, and you go back to square one again and you have to start again. With policy, it's entrenched, it's not going anywhere, and it's there to stay. So it sets people up now, and it sets people up for the future, that it's such a catalyst for change. And I think so many people are engaged in policy and thinking about policy and maybe don't realize they are, because it's such a stigmatized thing of it's legislation. It's so much more than that. It's the wording behind the legislation, and it's the it doesn't have to be a bill or an act or whatever it may be. There's so many different forms of it, and all of these campaigns that are running, they're successful because at the end point policy has been created. So that's what we're trying to do, is create that vehicle where we can take everything that the disability community is saying and be that vehicle to implement change.
Yeah, cool. Important points there.